Hi there, class. I am away from my in-laws now, and I am coming to you from the airport at in Toronto, Terminal E, which is the international terminal. And I had a few spare moments, so I thought I'd do a little bit more of our work for this week. The next topic that we're going to be covering is persuasion. Persuasion is one of my very favorite topics because I love the idea of reaching into somebody's brain and tinkering around with the things that are in there. Human beings are very, very unpredictable animals, and this bears out a lot in persuasion. It's been a topic of investigation for thousands of years. How do you persuade somebody else to do something? What are the mechanics of somebody changing their mind? Now, I want to first point out that this is distinct from another effect, which we call compliance gaining. Compliance gaining is if you just want somebody to do something, right? You don't need them to think differently. You don't need to instill a belief in them or change something in their minds. You just need them to act in a certain way, and then after that they can forget it. Those are often confused topics. So, for Star Wars, and those of you who haven't seen it, of course, will be behind on this. In the first Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker pull up in their land speeder, and there's a bunch of stormtroopers waiting for them, looking for C-3PO and R2-D2, right? Looking for the droids. And Obi-Wan Kenobi waves his hand and he says, "These aren't the droids you're looking for." And the stormtroopers mechanically reply back, "These aren't the droids we're looking for," right? That's not persuasion. That is compliance gaining. He didn't turn the stormtrooper against the Empire. He didn't change his mind about anything. He forced him to do something, effectively forced. When we're talking about this sort of thing, a lot of people are very interested in compliance gaining, and so I always try in the persuasion class to still give a little inkling about compliance gaining, and it's a fantastic area of research. If you're interested, actually, probably the best compliance gaining researcher in the world is at MSU right now. His name is Frank Boster. If you're ever interested in following up on any of this, but in general, there's four overarching techniques for compliance gaining. They would be foot in the door. Foot in the door is you get somebody to agree to a small request, and then once they've agreed to it, they're more likely to agree to larger requests. There's door in the face, which is you start off with a gigantic request, and then follow it up when it's refused with a smaller request. You're playing on their guilt. Then there's reciprocity. Reciprocity is this deeply held human instinct to reciprocate when something is done for them. You guys are too young to know this, but I guess I'm at the airport right now. When I was a kid, there was this group called the Hare Krishnas. Hare Krishnas were they would wear these sort of orange Zen Buddhist-like robes, and they'd hang out a lot at the airports. What they'd do is they'd approach you while you were at the airport, and they'd give you a flower, and they'd say, "Please accept this flower as a free gift from the Church of Hare Krishna." And you'd say, "Oh, thank you." And then they would follow it up with, "Would you like to make a donation to the Church of Hare Krishna?" And people found it very difficult to say no. In fact, people found it so difficult to say no, eventually Hare Krishnas got banned from the airports. That kind of direct request following something that's been done triggers something in humanity that's very fundamental. And then the last thing would be just direct asking. So there was this one time that a certain researcher I might know was in Vegas, and he was there with some friends for their joint 30th birthday. And this hypothetical researcher and his buddies ran out of money. They had to try to scrounge up enough cab fare. They had a very expensive show that they were booked to see, and they didn't have cab fare to get there, and they needed the cab fare fast. So they broke up into four groups, and each of the four groups employed a different persuasion tactic. By the way, I always tell this story jokingly as though it's hypothetical, but this really did happen, actually. So we broke up into 4 groups, and each one of our groups was going to use one of these 4 strategies: foot in the door in the face, reciprocity, and direct asking. We had half an hour before we had to be in the taxi cab. Now, I'll just preview the end of this story. By the end of it, not only had we acquired enough money to get to the show, we actually paid for dinner for the entire week. The Now, so for the door in the face group, they would start off by asking for $20, and the person would say no, and then you'd follow up with a request for one. With the foot in the door group, you'd start off by asking for a dime, and then bump it up to $1 when the person was pulling out their dime. For the reciprocity group, they'd look for people with empty drinks or that sort of thing to throw away. They'd grab them, throw them away, and then ask for money. And then the direct asking group, of course, just said, "Hey, can I borrow $5? We're running late for a show. We need a taxi." Now, given time constraints and all the other factors, which group do you suppose raised the most money? Actually, rank all 4 of them in order, and that'll be the first part of our discussion this week. And try to justify your answer as well, just from the little bit that we already know about compliance gaining. All right, guys, I am in Japan right now. So this has been kind of a broad and strange lecture to give. Anyway, let me just continue here by saying, obviously, this isn't going to be a normal week for your assignments. I think I mentioned this before, but it's been a really long couple of days for me. But just to make it absolutely and totally clear, your stuff isn't going to be due until next week. I'm going to give you a 1-week extension on everything, the quiz and the discussions. Okay, so hopefully that should mitigate any of the problems you might otherwise have had. I'm also going to only cover uses and gratifications and persuasion this week. That way, you won't have had to absorb quite so much, and I'll spread the other 2 topics out over the rest of the semester, and that should make life a little bit easier. We actually do have a couple of lighter weeks coming up, and maybe shifting some of those topics over will help things out. So just consider this one a slightly easier week. I'm sorry that things got so odd this week. Hopefully everything will even out now. Although I'll still be in Japan for next week. All right, so let's finish talking about persuasion. Persuasion is distinct from what we've already been talking about, compliance gaining, right? In a couple of ways. First off, in order for you to have a persuasive message, there are markers that have to be met. The big one is, as far as we're concerned anyway, the effects of persuasive messages are intended, right? You have to mean to actually be changing somebody's mind. It can't just happen. I mean, there are lots of things in my life that I have randomly encountered that have led to gigantic shifts in my attitudes and my feelings and my opinions. But those things that were accidental aren't persuasive messages, right? Those times where somebody has communicated with me with the intention of changing my mind and successfully done so, that was a persuasive message. Also, persuasive messages cannot be compelled. In other words, like, in order for you to have a persuasive message, the person can't be forced into a situation where they are compelled to agree with you, right? Their mind has to change of their own free will, for lack of a better phrase. And then finally, in order for you to have a persuasive message, you have to have the object of changing a person's attitudes, right? You want to achieve behavior change based on attitude change. You change the mind first, and then the behavior. That's where it's primarily distinct from compliance gaining. Because with compliance gaining, I don't need you to change your mind, right? With the Hare Krishnas, they didn't need you to become a follower of the Church of Hare Krishna. What they needed was for you to give them money. And beyond that, they didn't care, right? Now, if they had been attempting to achieve a persuasive message, right, they would have tried to convert you first. They would have tried to convince you that the work of their church was good, that their beliefs were valid, and that this was a cause that was worthy of having your support. And then would have hoped that your behavior would, would be in line with that, and you would support them. There are a lot of different models that we use to explain persuasion. A lot of them. We are only going to look at 3. And when I say 3, I really mean 2, right? We're going to look at the elaboration likelihood model, which is ELM, and we're going to look at the theory of reasoned action. Now, the theory of reasoned action is an old theory that has grown and grown and grown. And one of the elements that it's grown is called the theory of planned behavior, which is identical to theory of reasoned action, except that it adds just one more variable. But if you look in your PowerPoints, you can see there are lots of persuasion models, and that's not even an exhaustive list. There are many, many, many more persuasion models out there. The history is pretty long, and it started with something that we're going to be covering later on in the semester with propaganda. People wanted to be able to manipulate their populations into supporting a war and to contributing to that war. And that's a hard thing to do because war is a really horrible, ugly thing. Sometimes if you're at war, you're going to need people's support or you will lose. So people started looking into it. And the big one in World War II was a researcher that we've talked about actually named Carl Hovland, and he found that there were 3 important steps to successful persuasion. First off, the listeners had to pay attention to the message. You had to, that's called attending the message. If you don't hear the message taking place, you're not going to be persuaded by it because you didn't hear it, right? Somewhere out there, someone is saying something absolutely brilliant that would reform my whole life, change my mind about so many things, and it's not going to do any of that because I can't hear them, right? So you have to actually be paying attention. You have to attend the message. You have to comprehend it. In other words, you have to understand it, right? Right? Now, maybe what I've said is just something very compelling and powerful that will transform you. But unless you speak Hebrew, and I always have one student in my classes, always one student who speaks Hebrew. I guess I could go with Enarchein halogos kai halogos tuthu kai halogos enthu. I'll go Greek, right? I never have Greek speakers. Unless you know what's just come out of my mouth, you're not going to be able to understand it. Man, I tell you what, I am in Japan. This is the first time I've ever been in a country where I was unfamiliar with the alphabet because I speak German, Greek, Latin, Hebrew. I speak French and Spanish, and because I know these languages, I'm familiar with my surroundings almost always. I went to Israel. I wouldn't call myself conversationally adept in Hebrew, but I could at least read the things that were there because I could understand their alphabet. I could say things. I can't understand anything. I spent a few hours trying to get my head around the Japanese alphabet, but they've got 3 of them, and that makes it really, really tough. Someday I'll dedicate the time, but I pay attention to these things, right? Like, I'm a linguist. I'm very interested in language. But just because I'm paying attention to something doesn't mean I understand it. And if I don't comprehend the message, it's not going to work any persuasion on me. The same thing happens with movies, right? Let's see, I went Christian the last time, so let's go the other direction. Let's go atheist, right? With The Truman Show, right? The Truman Show is a giant allegory for mankind shedding its reliance on God and striking out on his own. Now, I have a lot of friends who are Christians, and they love it. I shouldn't say it that way. I'm a Christian too. There are a lot of friends of mine who are Christians, and they saw it and they absolutely loved that movie because they didn't catch what it was trying to say. Even if they had caught what it was trying to say, they probably still would have liked it. It was a fun movie. It was enjoyable. It was funny sometimes. It wasn't exactly like Jim Carrey at his best, but you could still watch it, enjoy it, and disagree with the message. But if you don't even notice that message is there, you're not going to be persuaded by it. And then finally, listeners must accept the message. So not only do you have to hear it and pay attention to it, not only do you have to comprehend it, you have to accept that it is in some way true and valid, right? Oh man, people pick on Trump so much. Let's think of a different one. Oh bother. Okay, Johnson. How about that? The libertarian candidate for president. I think I can talk about him without offending anybody. The if you hear what he's saying, he speaks English, and he speaks English fantastically well, and he's very understandable and comprehensible. Like his ideas, point A leads to point B, and it makes sense. But if you're not a libertarian, you're probably not going to agree with what he's saying, and some of his perspectives. You might consider extreme. Maybe you consider mainline, but maybe you consider them extreme. Maybe you like this one, but not this one. And so you're going to look at what it is that you accept in his message. And if you don't accept his message, you're not going to be persuaded by it. If you aren't compelled to believe that it's true, you're probably not going to be persuaded by it. That's what Carl Hovland found. Now, in the years since, we've found that he's wrong on at least 2 of those 3 points, and maybe 3 of those 3 points. You could make a pretty cogent argument for it. But we'll talk about that probably a little bit later. He went on to say that there were 5 variables that affect persuasive power. First off, and this is the big one, if you remember nothing else from what makes something persuasive and powerful, remember this one: credibility of the message source. Credibility goes in all sorts of different directions, right? People are credible for a lot of reasons, but let's be realistic. The main reason that somebody's credible is because of how they look. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is grim reality right there. We consider attractive sources to be the most credible in general. On a side note, then, actually did a little bit of weird research. I had a student years ago who asked me what the best way to break up with a boyfriend would be and still maintain a friendship. Well, that question plagued me. I thought that was a pretty compelling question. And so I did a bunch of work on it, and what I found was, if you're going to break up with your significant other, if you're going to break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, the best way to do it and maintain the relationship and have good feelings and be able to hang out with their friends still is, when you break up, look fantastic. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that is the best way to do it, because they will hear the things that you are saying, and because you look fantastic, you're going to be a credible message source. So they'll attend to your message, they'll listen to it, and they'll believe that it's coming from a sincere place. So there you go. That's your practical advice for the day, I suppose. The type of message appeal, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Strong messages, weak messages. The order that the arguments are presented in is important. We won't get into that so much, but that can be an interesting variable. Audience identification with certain groups, right? If you're a Republican and you hear a message, and that message is attributed to a Republican, you're more likely to accept it than if I took that exact same message and attributed it to a Democrat. So if you're a Clinton supporter, I could take a quote made by Bill Clinton and put Donald Trump on the bottom instead of Bill Clinton, and you would hate that quote and find reasons that it's racist, and I mean, do all those things. I don't mean you. I mean like the generic population, you that we're always talking about when we're talking about research. Your identification with a group is very, 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 very powerful. And then also the personality of the audience, right? What's the audience like? Are they hostile? Are they temperamental? And now, when I'm talking about personality of an audience, sometimes you're like, well, audiences don't have a personality. You know, there's a bunch of people in an audience, and that's true. But I can still generalize. They have a mean personality, right? They have an average personality, and sometimes it's obvious, right? If I'm in front of an NRA meeting, I can make certain suppositions about the people that are in there. I can guess at their party affiliation. I can guess at their personality. I can guess at what types of messages are going to appeal to them. Excuse me. So, just because you don't know everybody as an individual doesn't mean that you can't know the group. Anyway, so that was Carl Hovland. Lazarsfeld really took it at the same sort of time as Hovland, and he took it in a slightly different direction, but one that made it more relevant for media communication, which is our class. Which is, he said that media messages do have an influence on persuasion, but it's less to take attitudes and change them. The role that media tends to play In Persuasion, and I'm speaking slowly here so that you get this into your notes, the reason that the role that persuasion tends to play, or that media tends to play in persuasion, is reinforcement, not attitude change. When you're watching a show and you already have an attitude, if you watch a pro-attitudinal show, if you're a Republican and you watch Fox, if you're a Democrat and you watch MSNBC, that is where media is going to have its strongest effect for you, reinforcing your message, because now you're going to have the perception that this is a widespread belief that a lot of people have. And that's an accurate perception in either case, right? Lots of people are Republicans, lots of people are Democrats, right? That's the reason those parties exist, is because there's a lot of people who think that way. So media serves that purpose. However, if you're a Republican and you're watching MSNBC, or if you're a Democrat and you're watching Fox, it's not too likely that they're going to achieve a strong, persuasive effect on you. Media messages then tend to be influenced by certain opinion leaders, right? If you are a big Bill O'Reilly fan, right? Your attitude towards a lot of things is going to be heavily dependent upon his attitude. He's an opinion leader, and he has then the power to change your opinion. But the media in general probably doesn't. So you end up with some indirect effects. The media has an influence on opinion leaders, and opinion leaders have an influence on you. So that's kind of the history on the thing, and most of those effects, I would say, are guiding principles for current research. Let's talk just briefly about attitudes, emotions, behavior, and how they relate to persuasion. First off, an attitude. An attitude is a predisposition to evaluate others, either people or things, either favorably or unfavorably, right? If you are a Republican, you have an attitude towards Republicans, and you have an attitude towards Democrats. You probably have an attitude towards Libertarians and Green Party, and you've got subdivided areas of attitudes, so that you are, just from knowing that one variable about someone, you're predisposed to think about them in a certain way. And that makes it sound really bad, right? Like we're being really super judgmental, and I suppose we are, right? Like, you don't want to assert too many negative things on someone. In general, I find that the safest practice is to think that even if somebody disagrees with you about something, they probably have a really good reason for disagreeing with you. People are going to spend the rest of your life trying to prove me wrong on this point, but I'm going to tell you right now, people are not dumb. People are really intelligent. They give us plenty of evidence to the contrary, of course, but people are actually extremely intelligent, and anytime that we forget that, we're doing ourselves a very gross disservice, and we're doing them an even grosser disservice. However, if I meet somebody who is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, even if I know nothing else about them, or if I meet someone who's a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, even if I know nothing else about them, I can guess at certain things about them. I can guess at certain attitudes that they have. I can guess at certain feelings that they might have. I know a lot about them just from knowing their party affiliation. Now, is it all going to be accurate? Absolutely not. But that doesn't mean that I don't have an attitude which forms. So anyway, that's the big thing with attitudes. Emotions are, feelings. Those are things that fluctuate really quickly, right? And they can even jag, right? Like, I'll be scared, but I'll only be scared for a few seconds in the presence of a stimuli, right, or stimulus. Attitudes endure. An attitude is a long-term thing. Okay. The best way to achieve persuasion, actual real persuasion, I'll just tell you right now, which is the theory of cognitive dissonance. And the theory of cognitive dissonance states that inconsistencies between attitude and action cause anxiety that must be resolved, right? So let's say you are a Bernie Sanders supporter, and you have decided that you will never support Hillary Clinton, and you are adamant on that point. But all your friends are Democrats because you're really involved in that party. And so they convince you to come to a Clinton rally, okay? And you go to the Clinton rally, and you're standing there, and you're like this, and you're pissed. and you listen to the thing, and then at the end of the rally, they say, "Oh, and by the way, Senator Clinton is actually going to be here in a month. Come see her." And your friends get really excited, and you're like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." And then they take you anyway. And in the meantime, you've still been hanging out with all of your Democrat friends, and they've been waving the flag. And you go to the Clinton rally, and you're standing there, and there comes this point where you realize that your attitude, "I hate Clinton," is not consistent with your actions, which have been to attend her rallies and hang out with her supporters, right? So you've got this conflict. You've got this conflict between what you think, your attitude, right, your feelings on the matter, and what you're actually doing. When that happens, we experience cognitive dissonance, and that is the most powerful persuasive tactic that there is. Oh, am I losing you guys here? I might be. Oh, okay. Well, let's finish off real quick, and then I'll stop. If you are in that state, then something is going to have to change in order to resolve that conflict. Guess which is easier to change, your actions or your mind, right? Because we're cognitive misers, right? We tend to be lazy about things, and that's good, right? We're preserving energy. But it's much easier for us to change our minds than it is for us to change our actions. And so we tend to change our minds to meet up with what we are doing. That's cognitive dissonance. All right, it looks like I'm having some trouble here, so I'm gonna stop. Rather than make you guys wait, I'm going to post this up right away, and I'll put up a Persuasion Part 2 later. All right, good luck, guys.